Today's seminar is from our own. Brenda actually never asked you how to pronounce your last name. I say it Hoppe in my head, but is that correct? Okay. It's from our own Brenda Hoppe. She is a public health scientist who studies the varied impacts of climate change on human health and community well-being. She earned her PhD in public health with a minor in toxicology from Oregon State University, her master's in human physiology from the University of Oregon, and her bachelor's in education from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. As a climate resilience researcher for MCAP, she developed and coordinated interdisciplinary research integrating climate data to understand risks to humans and communities. So thank you, Brenda.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for that introduction. And thank you to everyone for joining me today to talk about this nexus of soil health and public health and the collaborative gap between these two disciplines. Let's see. But first, I need to thank Nicole Smiley and Amy Gillespie with the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate. I think many of you are familiar with these two people who are like Oz behind the curtain of the department. And if it wasn't for the two of them and all of the just great conversations we had and the input that you gave me on the research going on in the department and the different faculty members, none of this would have been possible. So I really appreciate the two of you for holding my hand through this really new topic of soil health. And I'll admit right here at the launch of my talk that compared to most of you on the webinar, I know relatively little about soil science, but I do know quite a bit about public health. I'm trained as an environmental epidemiologist, and I'm going to admit to something that might be shocking to some of you, maybe even completely offensive. But in the 20 years of mine working as a public health research scientist, I never really thought too much about soil. I've done a lot of work with water, a fair amount of work with air and air quality, and certainly a lot of work in the area of climate change and climate impacts on health. But soils never really got on my radar until just recently, when for the last year or so, I've been working in the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate at the university, mainly through a temporary appointment with the Climate Adaptation Partnership. And I've been exposed to all of the amazing research that's going on throughout the department, and a lot of it tracks back to soils. So as a result of this, I have become a passionate convert to the cult of soil. I have finally woken up to all the various links that tie soil health to human health, as well as the immediate need to address threats to soil to preserve human health, especially given the mounting pressures of climate change. So the author here is referring to farmers with his cult of soil reference, and with good reason, because farmers are essential for soil health and soil security. But I would argue that there are many more people and professions that have a key place in this cult. However, one profession that I couldn't help but notice is not so well represented. Now that I'm enlightened, I'm looking around and I'm wondering, where are all of the other public health professionals in this cult of soil? Where are all of the public health scientists and epidemiologists studying, researching, and promoting soil health and soil security? But then conversely, why aren't more people in soil science collaborating with colleagues in public health, centering some of public health's principles, frameworks, and methods to advance the application and impact of soil research? Now, in doing research for this talk, I went on to PubMed. That's one of the main search engines for research related to health and medicine. And I did a search on all the research that's been published on the nexus of soil health and soil security with human and public health. And granted, this is certainly not a comprehensive meta-analysis on the literature, but still, I was really shocked how few studies have been published on these crucial relationships. So my goal today for this talk is to address this tragic collaboration gap between soil science and public health. We'll talk a little bit about the soil crisis, review some of the factors and pathways that link soil to human health, and then I'll introduce you to some of the principles, frameworks, and methods that are central to public health and may also resonate with some of you that are working in soil science. And then last but not least, I'll wrap up with some questions to inspire your thinking around this topic. So how about that soil crisis that no one's really talking about? For most of you that are on the call today, you're already living with the scary knowledge that our planet is suffering a massive soil crisis. But sadly, this knowledge has not penetrated very deeply within the public mindset. Poor land management and issues of erosion, compaction, nutrient imbalance, pollution, acidification, waterlogging, and salinity are converging with the pressures of climate change, like more extreme weather events, to degrade the biodiversity in our soil that enables most of the benefits, these ecosystem services that we derive from soil and depend on to survive as a species. All of these alarming hits to the health of our soils, either directly or indirectly, will have or already are having major impacts on human health and community vitality. Some of these impacts are direct and fairly obvious. For example, we get well over 95% of the food that we eat from our soils. And while we are struggling to adequately feed everyone on the planet today, in less than 30 years, our global population is projected to leap from 7.8 to 9 billion human beings. So we have very little time to rally society to address the soil crisis, to allocate substantially more resources, to fund more collaborative research, and to rapidly change societal and individual choices that are affecting our soils. But the solution is not just about scaling up our current food production systems. Soils are highly varied, as many of you know, with wide-ranging physical and chemical properties. So it's not surprising that different soils produce crops with different nutritional content, either naturally or due to poor soil management. Now, there are 14 essential elements that make up 99.9% of atoms in the human body. All of them, except hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon, have soils as their major source. So it's possible to grow an adequate amount of food on a plot of soil that has sufficient calories, looks healthy, but is deficient in some of the essential nutrients like iodine, zinc, and selenium that the body needs to function and thrive. Now, this phenomenon is called hidden hunger, and it may be affecting nearly 2 billion people worldwide. It's also a good example of where soil science meets public health, not just in characterizing the soil mechanisms and the human health risk pathways, but in developing solutions that range from biofortification from the soil science side to diet supplements from the public health side. Another direct link between soil and human health is one that seems to be getting more attention these days, and that is antibiotics. Antibiotics in public health rank up there alongside vaccines as some of the leading game changers in our field, discoveries that led to massive, almost immediate, large-scale reductions in mortality and morbidity. Now, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but until recently, I had no idea that most antibiotics in current use today have come from soil bacteria. Penicillin, the first antibiotic, came from the soil fungus Penicillium. Now, soil microbes like bacteria, protozoa, and fungi are one of the reasons why I fell in love with the cult of soil, because these little critters are mind-boggling in their numbers. There are more microbes in a teaspoon of soil than there are people on the planet. That's nearly 8 billion microorganisms in that tiny amount of soil. And when I first read that, I imagined every human being on the planet, our entire species, shrunk down, reduced to living in a teaspoon of soil. And like these microbes, we wouldn't just be staying quiet and inert, keeping our hands to ourselves, not bothering anybody around us. No, we would be very active. We'd be interacting, developing systems, producing things, fighting one another, communicating, adapting, and evolving just like we've done on the face of the planet. So this really helped me realize just how much is going on beneath our feet, across teaspoons, across acres, across regions, and across continents. And if that isn't amazing enough, we have only identified 1% of the microbial species within our soils. So with a view to their potential role in preventative health and medicine, there is a massive pharmacy beneath our feet. And we've only accessed about one tiny quarter of one small shelf. And from a public health perspective, that is just thrilling. So I was excited to see that very recently, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine convened a committee to review the state of knowledge on the links between the soil microbiome and human health, with an emphasis on investigating some of the links that I just mentioned. So I'd encourage you to keep an eye out for this report, as hopefully it will help bring more attention to the consequences of the soil crisis for human health. And it will likely set priorities for future cross-disciplinary research on these topics, as well as funding initiatives. Now, there are other direct links between soil and humans that are just as compelling, such as the role of our soils in scrubbing contaminants from our drinking water, or that certain soils, when desiccated by drought or poor management, can turn to dust, travel thousands of miles, and be a direct irritant to the lungs or transport pathogens that can lead to disease like valley fever. So there's an entire semester's worth of information to explore here, just in the direct links between soils and humans. But I cannot give short shrift to the indirect links between soils and human health, and particularly community vitality, which I know resonates with many folks in extension services. Now, these links are too often marginalized as being too distant or abstract, but the indirect impacts can sometimes affect a much larger part of the population. I'm only going to touch on a couple of these indirect impacts today, and these include damage to the built environment and threats to livelihood. Now, humans live, work, and play mainly on the foundation of our soils. We've built an entire anthropogenic ecosystem on top of soil that has a huge influence over the patterns of our life and the stability of our communities, not just physically, but functionally. Damage to our built environment can certainly lead to unsafe conditions, but can also displace entire communities, drain municipal budgets, and bankrupt households. For example, erosion depletes the storage capacity of reservoirs and dams, which threatens power generation and essential utility services for humans like heating and cooling that depend on electricity. Erosion that can result from poor soil management or biodiversity loss can destroy homes, roads, and bridges, leading to loss of life or major injury, but again, can lead to displacement, major financial stress on families, and also require municipalities to shift resources, limited resources, from healthcare, education, parks and rec funding, or workforce development that support community vitality, and then have to shift all that funding to now shoring up endangered or damaged infrastructure. So the photos here are from the 2014 Oso, Washington mudslide, where a portion of an unstable hill collapsed, crushing an entire neighborhood, killing 43 people and destroying nearly 50 homes and other buildings. Prior to this tragic event, the area had received heavy rainfall for an extended period of time, nearly 200% of normal. Public health preparedness, emergency management, civil engineers and urban planners grappling with adapting our built environment to the pressures of climate change and erosion need soil experts on their team to understand and address how soil health, and especially soil biodiversity, can maintain the health of our built environment. So for example, soil science has demonstrated that soils without earthworms can be 90% less effective at soaking up water, which means increased water runoff, erosion, and flooding. Land without vegetation can be eroded more than 100 times faster than land covered in vegetation. So it's not a big leap to say that maintaining the integrity and biodiversity of our soils is crucial for our built environment and for public safety. Now, the other important indirect link between soil health and human health is mediated through the loss of livelihood and the resulting impact of an unstable economy on human beings and community vitality. The loss of livelihood that I'm referring to is farming. I know there are some ways to grow food without soil, like hydroponically, but it's doubtful that hydroponic farming is going to help us maintain food security for the world's population, especially at the rate that we're growing. The world needs farmers, these keepers of the cult of soil, just as much as farmers need soil. The further that we degrade and lose the viability of our soils, the more we lose the viability of farming as a livelihood. The more farmers find themselves unable to care for themselves and their families, the more individual farms go bankrupt and shut down, the more we are going to find our rural economies destabilized and the vitality of rural communities significantly degraded. According to the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, each year globally, 75 billion tons of soil are stripped off the land by wind and water erosion, and most of that is coming off of agricultural lands. And we don't get that vital growth medium back anytime soon. It takes about 1,000 years to create a few centimeters of topsoil. And by some estimates, we are losing soil from our ag lands 10 to 40 times faster than the current rate of soil formation. And that's a loss which directly imperils our food security. Now, I work mainly in the area of climate and health. And when I'm asked what is the leading threat to health from climate change in the Midwest, my answer is the loss of farming as a livelihood and what that is going to do to the health of farmers, their workers and their families, and the repercussions that loss multiplied will have for rural economies and therefore the vitality, if not the viability, of rural communities. Farming is the backbone of the Midwest. According to the USDA, these are the top 10 agriculture producing states in the US, and I've listed them here based on their quality of cheese curds and who has the best football team, notwithstanding quarterbacks. So as a side note, I may live and work in Minnesota, but I clearly am and always will be a born and bred cheesehead. But please note that of these top 10 agricultural producing states, most of them are here in the Midwest. Now, some of you may think that farming today is no longer a mom and pop enterprise, but it most certainly is. Almost all of our nation's farms, about 98%, are considered family farms, and they account for the majority, 83% of farm production in the US. Now, full disclosure of some innate biases that I bring to this presentation. I'm extremely proud of my deep roots in Wisconsin dairy farming and my close ties to those of my family that are still farming and the land that we've farmed outside of Menominee, Wisconsin now for generations. That land, including the soil that sustains it, is an almost visceral part of my identity. The time that I spent on the farm growing up made me the staunch environmentalist that I am today. I know firsthand how vital farms are, not just for sustaining our food security, but also for establishing close connected communities, driving climate-based innovations, and anchoring our national economy. Plus, each farmer is an irreplaceable, invaluable library of information on the soils that they farm. Information that is accumulated across generations and is verified almost daily when that farmer wakes up and walks their land. You lose a farmer and you lose one of the most essential soil surveillance tools that we have. But farming it's always been hard, but it's gotten harder. Besides the loss of productive soils, land itself is just getting hard to afford, if not hard to find. By some estimates, 250,000 US acres are either paved over or repaved every year. Not only is the land expensive, but so are the tractors, the fuel, the help, the fertilizers, the pesticides, the seeds, the animals, the buildings, the water, the electricity. And again, the pressures of climate change have made all of this even more difficult to manage. So this is a story that was published in the New York Times just a few days ago, and I hope you all will take the time to seek it out and read it. The rate of suicide among farmers is 3.5 times higher than among the general population. Suicide rates in rural communities increased by nearly 50%, and that's pre-pandemic between 2000 and 2018. Farming is not just a livelihood. It's a way of life, and it's a legacy that you build and you pass down to your children and your children's children, so that each farm you see driving through the countryside represents not just a small business that's essential for the local economy, but it represents a long-standing commitment to steward the land and to keep the culture of farming alive. As a person, when you're not able to keep that legacy going and you face having to give up what generations of your family have invested their hearts and souls into, the loss for many of the only job that they've ever known, the only way of life that they've ever known. With all of that in mind, these statistics aren't any less tragic, but they do become understandable. Suicide is a major public health issue. Loss of livelihood is a major public health issue. How degradation of agricultural soils threatens farming as a livelihood then is a serious public health issue. So hopefully at this point, whether you are a soil professional, a public health professional, or you're just an interested bystander that happened upon my webinar, I hope you've gained an appreciation for the wide-ranging links, direct and indirect, tying soil health to human health. But what I'd like to do now is try and make the case for why progress on the soil crisis depends on deep, meaningful collaboration between soil and health professionals, highlighting some of the synergies between these two disciplines. So here's my simple pitch to all of you soil professionals and for why you should partner with public health. First, humans are incredibly egocentric, and even more so, we are very species-centric. Regardless of how false it may be, humans place ourselves at the center of the universe in terms of importance and value. The more that you highlight the connections of your work to how it benefits and serves human beings, the more likely you are to gain the public's attention, to capture more support and resources, aka funding, and achieve major gains fighting the soil crisis. Public health as a science has many useful principles, frameworks, and methods that could be very useful when applied to soil research and advocacy. And some of these you've already seen percolate through my presentation, and I'll talk a little bit about more later. Public health has faced some of the same challenges plaguing soil science today as I can see it, especially when it comes to addressing human behaviors and choices. And we've learned some lessons, gathered some valuable information and strategies that we can share. A couple examples of this would be how to deal with crisis fatigue. When the public is so burnt out on fear and tragedy, say from COVID, climate change, mental health, that they then have very little bandwidth left to care for any more crises like the soil crisis. And we have strategies for that. Or the struggle with the human propensity to be extremely short-sighted and lean very hard into this out of sight, out of mind thinking. In public health, especially those involved in infectious disease management, like COVID, we deal with this all the time, and we have strategies, again, to share. And then finally, people trust us. That trust isn't always absolute, as was shown during the pandemic, but by and large, the public understands that public health professionals are not driven by profit or power. Our primary focus is human well-being. And certainly on an issue-by-issue basis, we can end up struggling for the hearts and minds of the public. And I can reference here not just COVID, but seatbelt use, consumption of cigarettes and sugary sodas. But overall, gaining the public's trust and attention is an easier lift for us in public health. Now, as I've gotten to know more about soil science, research, and advocacy, I've seen a lot of synergy with some of the core principles that define what public health is. Public health defines health not just as the absence of disease, but the ability of an individual in their community to thrive, to be resilient in the face of disruption, and inhabit one's full potential in a way that enables the same for others. Unlike traditional medicine, public health is dedicated to prevention over treatment, and we strive to push our focus and interventions as far upstream as we can to eliminate a threat or an exposure long before it becomes an issue for humans and their communities. We certainly care about individuals, but we view the health of any individual as a direct function of the place and the population that they inhabit. And then vice versa, we view the well-being or vitality of a population as determined by the health of each of its individuals. So like many of you, we have an ecosystems view of the world. Then, as Minnesota's beloved Paul Wellstone always said, we all do better when we all do better. and that's classic public health. But the more that we expand our view of health as a function of determinants and factors that are outside of the individual, the more interdisciplinary our work has to be. In addressing air pollution, public health works with transportation engineers. To address the obesity epidemic, you'd find us collaborating with advertising executives. To fight the soil crisis, we need to seek out soil scientists and extension professionals. Public health is very interdisciplinary, and we are well-versed and enthusiastic to work across disciplinary silos. And we have a gentle touch, because so much of public health is aimed at changing people's minds and modifying behaviors. We've learned that carrots are more effective than sticks. We prioritize education and engagement over laws and fines. And over time, we've developed effective strategies for getting people aware of problems and engaged in solutions. Now, one of my favorite public health frameworks that I think should resonate easily with the soil scientists among you, and also certainly extension folks, is the social and environmental determinants of health framework. Now, this framework encapsulates many of these principles that I've just shared. It shows how individuals are nested in multiple spheres of influence, such as the natural environment, built environment, economies, and cultures that overlap and enmesh an individual and many wide-ranging factors that determine health. Identifying these factors then leads us to scrutinize how they can threaten health and also how they may offer opportunities for intervention. Now, this framework may seem pretty coarse and high level, but the determinants of health framework helps us with developing the causal pathways that guide our public health work as we seek to apply data to characterize these pathways, conduct thorough risk assessments, and pinpoint nodes in this network where interventions would be most effective at reducing downstream adverse impacts. I'm sorry, I hear an alarm here. Sorry, everyone. Okay, no worries. The house is not on fire. Just my presentation. Okay, so this brings me now to methods, specifically those represented by my field of epidemiology. Epidemiology is the study of the distribution and determinants of health-related states, factors, and events in specific populations, and the application of this study to the control of health problems. Epidemiologists are mappers and modelers, just like many of you. And like you, we love a good causal diagram. We are also the data nerds in public health, and we adhere to many of the same standards of quality guiding the collection, analysis, and interpretation of data as many of you. And since data is often expensive and hard to get, especially when it comes to human beings, we are great at identifying and utilizing secondary data sets that already exist to characterize determinants and the relationships between them. Now, burdening you with a prayer on epidemiologic methods is outside of the scope of my talk today, but many of our methods are relevant for soil science research. For some of you, they may seem very familiar, especially since epidemiology draws on methods from other scientific fields, including biostatistics and informatics, various environmental sciences, economics, and behavioral sciences. Furthermore, there are many other subdisciplines within public health that offer very different methods from epidemiology that could be just as useful to soil science and advocacy. Besides the analyses that we epidemiologists and risk assessors perform, my colleagues in health economics are skilled in cost-benefit analyses. My colleagues in health promotion are experts in social marketing and behavior modification. And my colleagues in health policy are brilliant with grounded theory and critical discourse analysis. So my point is that the bridge between soil science and public health is not just conceptual or theoretical. We can also borrow, adapt, and apply each other's methods. The tools in our professional toolbox are useful as well as our ideas and our principles. Finally, to leave you all with a little nugget of hope, early in my talk, I showed you the pretty paltry number of peer-reviewed papers that have been published on the soil health public health nexus. But here are some more numbers. And these are those same terms used this time to search within ProQuest. And I filtered just for student dissertations and theses. And the numbers here are so much better, so much bigger. It seems that we've got a large and growing number of fresh minds coming on the scene who are already bridging the soil health, public health gap. And through them, the future looks a lot brighter and a lot dirtier. So forgive me for that horrible pun, but I just couldn't resist. So that is the end of my talk, but I just wanted to share for those of you who want to do a deeper dive, this is an excellent review. Goes way deeper into the direct and indirect connections between soil health and human health by Breivik and colleagues. So I really recommend this as a paper to check out. I'm sure many of you are already aware of this, but I think this is a fairly new journal that's just been started, Soil Security. I think this would be an excellent place for submitting collaborative research from public health and soil science folks. And then I just wanted to tee, and again, I thank Nicole and Amy for helping me tee up these questions, just to get a little discussion going if people are interested. Why isn't there more collaboration between public health and soil science? And what would help bridge this gap? Do you see opportunities in your own research, programming, or coursework where you could incorporate soil health or public health? What opportunities exist at the University of Minnesota to facilitate more soil health collaboration? And are there opportunities outside of the university, such as external funding or working with institutes that faculty and students could tap into? And then finally, if there are any students on the call that are interested in helping create content for the SWAC website or a story page on the topic, I would love to hear from you. So please email me. So that's all that I have today. I'm going to leave these questions up in case we want to tackle them, and I'll just open it up for the audience. Thanks, Nicole and Amy.
Hi, Brenda. I have a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Fabian Fernandez. Really interesting presentation. Thank you. And you are forgiven for not knowing as much about soils because you have repented. You have learned a lot, but we need to ask for forgiveness, or I need to ask for forgiveness because I don't know much about public health and all the things that you are doing in your discipline. The question I have is related to what you mentioned, about how little we know about what's under our feet in the soil. And, you look at NASA and the things that they do, and everybody kind of gets behind their efforts, and we know more about space than we know about our own soils that we interact with every day. And just the question I have is, in your view, what are we missing? How can we make soils more attractive or more exciting to society so that they can see the value? Because like you said, I feel like we are at the verge of a crisis, in terms of feeding the world population and the degradation that we are having in soils. And it seems like nobody seems to care much.
Yeah, thanks, Fabian. And thanks for your forgiveness too, for, stomping all over this incredibly exciting profession of yours. But I love your question, and thank you for inviting me to be able to talk a little bit more about this whole issue of why nobody's talking about the soil crisis. And I put myself on the spot because it wasn't on my radar either until I got involved with the department. And, the correlate that I saw, in terms of capturing the hearts and minds and attention of the public and getting them invested in addressing the soil crisis was ocean health and how, for so long, we saw our waterways as just being, sewage systems, a disposal network, for getting rid of all of our junk and pollution, right? The solution to pollution is dilution. And then we started developing, and I think it was a case of technology allowing us to go beneath the surface of our waters, particularly our ocean, and start bringing up pictures and witnesses to all this teeming life underneath it. And then I also think it was a collapse of fisheries, that got people appreciating the vulnerability of our oceans. But for the longest time, I think people just thought like they didn't understand that beneath this skin of, that separates us from all the life underneath the oceans is, there's just this, it reminded me a lot of what's going on with soil, that people don't understand all the teeming life underneath our soils. I think a lot of that is going to be helped tremendously by more technology, by being able to bring more pictures of these microscopic organisms to people's attention so that they can, visually see them. But I also think that we're going to need a tremendous bit of social marketing that happened again with our oceans and rallying people to appreciate that we're going to have a collapse of our food systems, just like we had a collapse of fisheries in the ocean. We'll have a collapse of our food systems with the soil crisis. And I couldn't help but just think what a tragedy it is that there aren't more people in the public health domain that are helping with that whole social marketing, behavior modification, that rallying people to get involved and to care in addressing the soil crisis from so many different angles. So I'm sorry, that was probably a really long, much longer answer than needed to be, but I can't help but be passionate about this subject. So I hope that was a roundabout way to get to your question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Pete, did you have a hand up? Thank you for joining the webinar, Pete. I love that you joined. Okay, maybe Pete is.
I don't know if you're talking this Pete, but I was just applauding.
Sorry, no, I'm talking to you, Pete, the one and only Pete Boulay from the Office of Climatology. All right, so is there any other comments, questions, or food for thought?
I have a question. Yeah. I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. I'm Kyung-soo Yu, soil scientist in the department. I believe every human being is actually born to be a soil scientist because I have 3 boys and I never met a single kid who doesn't like playing with the dirt, sand, and water. But then over the years, we grow sort of detached from the connection. And I hear that, there are many, I don't know if indeed it's many, but I occasionally hear that, our allergy issues, for example, have some connection to the frequency that you are kind of, you're contacting with the dirt, the soils, and water in the environment. So there seem to be some, issues between the disconnections and then people's allergy problems or other health issues. But then we hear them, but we never, at least me, and I never really followed that to understand what the real issues are. And if you have any updates, your thoughts on this relationship, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that comment and question. I just, it kind of goes back to this whole issue of how to capture the hearts and minds of the public, because, frankly, we need more funding coming in to address this disciplinary gap. And I do feel very passionate that this addressing this gap between our disciplines, soil health, public health, is absolutely essential if we're going to make any movement on the soil crisis. And, I think to your point that you've got 3 kids that love playing in the dirt, I think that certainly that helps to have kids to get you connected to the dirt. But what also helps is, having connections to farming. And, I am clearly very connected to my farming roots, pun intended. But more and more and more now, people are becoming more and more distant from, having family, close family, or even distant family that are dependent on farming for a livelihood. So it's just so, and from the public health perspective, this was such a wake-up call for me, putting this presentation together and, trying to give it to as many people I can in extension, and then also public health and so forth. And I just think that too often there's been a deficit perspective paid to soil science from the public health realm. I think that there's always been so much. I was a risk assessor in the private sector for a while, and our attention to soils was just contamination. Now I've celebrated the work that's being done on through NASM and the soil microbiome with human microbiome and advancing antibiotic research. But I see more so that the bulk of attention in that world is paid to how soils are manifesting antibiotic resistance. And so it was just so, and I'm a mid-career 50-year-old public health scientist, been around for a while doing this. But when I read that little factoid about how there are more organisms in a teaspoon of soil than there are on the planet, like that's the kind of thing that just, really sent my mind whirling. And I just think that, that there needs to be more of that effort in trying to do that important social marketing, connecting all these, trying to mitigate the distance that's developed between farmers and, and those of us connected to farming. And, it's unfortunate that, for rallying people to ocean health, we could get them all excited about dolphins and seals, and rallying people to get excited about soil health is going to mean getting excited about protozoa and earthworms. And it's a little bit, I wish we had a lot more sexier champion, for soils, but I think that can be dealt with. There are strategies for that. And like I said, my public health colleagues that are working in behavior modification and soil, social marketing, all that stuff, they have such an expertise in helping with that. So I don't know, again, a long-winded way to probably not answer your question, but I just thank you for making that comment and allowing me to go off a little further. So Teresa, do you had a comment or a question?
Well, I was thrown into the agricultural realm because the waterways that go into our lake go through farm and actually go all the way to the Mississippi eventually. And they're very high in phosphorus and nitrogen runoff. So it's not just the soil that's leaving, a lot of harmful chemicals are leaving. Plus, I guess some are getting into the well water as well. And, but here's a problem. These agricultural producers, a well-managed farm field actually doesn't have that millions of micro because they're killed by the pesticides, I believe. But they're afraid. Their profit margin is very low, and they really do need that high yield, and they need all this stuff to keep their farms in the family. So I don't know if this is public health or public policy. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, and not to be stereotypical, but my comment is that it takes them all. It takes them all. And I truly believe, and again, I'm biased because some of my favorite people on the planet are farmers. And I'm a big fan. But I also recognize that, that farmers are at the mercy of the innovations that can be brought to them and that can be tested for their cost effectiveness. But having seen a number of young farmers come up in my family, that I can tell you that young farmers are the same as the young students in our classrooms. They are hungry for challenges. They are interested in new innovations, and they have a courage about testing, and trying out different methods, but I mean, they have to be done in such a way, I guess this is where your policy measures come in, that, can help them sustain their livelihood. I mean, we are at such a point. I work in climate change, so I feel the drive for innovation all around me in so many different areas. And that is happening also in agriculture. And that's why I am also such a huge fan of extension. I mean, I just think that extension is, I often say that engineers are going to save the world. I think extension professionals are going to save the world, because they are at such a pivotal point of bringing a lot of the, the innovations and new practices that are being cultivated in our university environment. And then, putting it through a filter of, is this practical? Is this cost effective? Can this be implemented by people that don't have a suite of PhDs? And then, and then stewarding the farmers through that process so that their practices can be a lot more sustainable. And I'm very sensitive to that point that you bring up. My whole dissertation was on farm sourced nitrate contamination to private drinking water. So I am very sympathetic to that. And it is so difficult to remediate those kind of contamination, especially in our groundwater once it gets in there. But I am so hopeful. Like I really believe that farmers, I think in the past have been unfairly painted as stodgy obstacles to agricultural innovations. And I think that they absolutely can be, the early adopters to a lot of these necessary innovations, if they can just be stewarded through in a supportive architecture that can happen through our extension services. And likewise, I was so struck by our own state extension services that we have a community vitality department, and other extension services in other areas of the nation have community vitality programs. And those are just to me, that's a perfect marriage of, efforts of that farmer innovation outreach with community vitality, values and priorities. And I think extension is really going to be our savior in that area. But thank you so much for bringing that up, Teresa. Are there any other comments or concerns or thoughts?
Nancy, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to read it out?
Oh, I can.
Okay.
I say, do we even need to, I think everyone thinks this is important and can realize that, but do we even need to start with younger with making sure that agricultural or environmental science courses are offered at middle schools and high schools? Sometimes they're not even offered at these schools at all, or making sure they're in rotation along with like music and art. So at least you get a taste of it. So students even know that these are possible career tracks to be interested in and aware of. So I think that's another speak for education in that case.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. And that's an excellent comment about trying to capture the hearts and minds as early as possible with, advancing curriculum in the primary school and our high schools, that's targeted to soil science. But even then, I would say that, even in those early grades curriculum, that there needs to be a tie back to the so what for public health, and like I said, it is a tragedy that we are so myopic about, the human being's place in the world, and that we see ourselves as being, the most important thing that there is. But in a way, that gives us an opportunity for influencing people's behaviors and their attention. So the more that we can tie, even for these young folks that may just get excited to dig in the dirt and learn about all the cool critters in there, the more that we can make those ties back to how important soils are for human societies and human well-being, I think making those ties is essential, no matter if it's, early elementary curriculum or, postdocs or, tenure faculty. I think that making those ties is essential. I just think it's time. Like for myself, I came out, graduated with my doctorate at a time when environmental public health, framing public health and its connections to the environment was kind of becoming a codified major. And a lot of that tracked back to the Superfund CIRCLA kind of days. It was more water compartment and air compartment that we were focused on, not necessarily soils. And I just think it's time for a sexy new topic for public health folks to get excited about. And I think that is definitely going to happen. We just need to have more people out there that are having these kind of conversations, that are crossing the aisles. And like I said, it's one thing to, I've talked a little bit about this presentation. It's one thing to have these conversations and be reaching across the aisle, but if there aren't dedicated funding coming out of the NIFA or, NASM or some of these other organizations, then, those relationships are hard to activate.
I got one comment. I think you're right. I think the big problem, there's a disconnect between where people get food and where it comes from. And I think there's just food on the table. And as long as you have food on the table, you don't care anymore. But I guess I would also argue that we've made a lot of progress on soil. I mean, you think about what happened in the 1930s with the Dust Bowl and with Franklin Roosevelt's quote about, a nation that destroys its soil, destroys itself, something like that. So, and that was the birth of the Soil Conservation Service, which is now the NRCS. So I guess I would argue that we've made some progress over the years. There's probably still a crisis, but it's definitely not as bad as it was back in the day. And yeah, but thanks for your seminar. It's just a comment and thought that I would bring that up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And absolutely celebrate the gains that have been made. And thanks to the soil scientists and extension professionals among you that have made that progress. I guess, where I would come and, I come as a great example of public health failure and the failure of the public in general, that why it just seems like this, all the gains that have been made too much on the shoulders of too few. And I really think that it's time now for other professions, absolutely public health, to be coming on board, address and making more gains with this soil crisis, and making gains in areas that are a lot more nuanced than just, lab or field science. And so that gets me to the whole issue of all this social marketing and how do we get, how do we develop more nuanced science education, and how do we, inspire more young people to get into this field. And then ultimately, I would love for there to be a more of a felt accountability for addressing the soil crisis outside of just the nation's Department of Soils, in different universities. And I think this is just like an all hands on deck kind of thing. And it is fascinating. Like I am so grateful for this opportunity to have been able to dig into this area. And I just think it is for the students among you. Like, I think this is, a lot of people are excited to go into the dark corners, right? Places where there hasn't been a lot done, where there's still a lot of questions, but there's a whole lot of promise. That's where people like to go. And I think that's exactly describes the nexus of soil health and public health. So I just respond to your comment saying thank you to all the progress that's been made to this point. And it's time for public health and the public in general to start getting on board and helping out with that effort. Anything else?
Yeah, I have. Go ahead. Yeah, I have some ideas about the soil health and people public health, because I think it's a big topic about soil health, because I think there is too complex to classify the soil health, because the soil health concludes many indicators. So first, we need to have a criteria about the soil health. And if we focused on one topic, yeah, my research is mainly focused on the soil nutrient management. So I think if we focused on the measurement, nutrient management, and plants or animals, and people's public health, they both connect together. Maybe I think it's good, because if we from the soil, from the healthy soil, we can product the good quality about the crop production. So I think the good quality, the good food is better for the good benefits for people's health. So if we connect them together, I think it can tell a story, maybe.
Yes.
I have some. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that comment. Thank you very much. And I absolutely, I think the more that we're successful in, and promoting, discussing all these different connections, and I just got to the tip of the iceberg of all these different connections, direct and indirect. The more that we make those connections in our little academic causal pathways or so forth, the more that we're putting people on the hot spot, the more that we're identifying, just like I've done right now, I have totally put public health on notice that they need to get involved in this area, and there's a place for them. And we can really unpack that further and further and keep asking ourselves, okay, when it comes to landslides, who do we get involved? Who do we address? And I think that's, like I said, I'm an epidemiologist, fan of causal pathways, and I'm also a big fan of those, determining those pathways as a way to spread accountability. So yeah, thank you for that comment.
Yeah, I have ever defined what is the best soil health, which is the better soil health. I have ever used the soil different nutrients and the soil microbiome diversity or soil communities, and I consider them together, and also conclude the fungi. So they are different soil microbiomes, and I define where, who, and they are there, how they are there. So we calculate the different soil quality, soil nutrient, and soil microbial diversity, and the soil communities, and I consider them together to calculate index, and to evaluate which soil types, and they are better, and we can compare it together, which is better, let's say the soil health is better or good, or not good, bad. We can divide the soil different kind.
I will say, if I can comment on that, just that there's benefit to having a less fixed definition of soil health too, like human health. The kind of health you want depends on the function you want from your body and in your life. And so you don't have to have the same kind of soil health in every soil. And so we're doing a lot of work in our Office for Soil Health and trying to figure out which indicators are effective for Minnesota soils, and different indicators work better in different parts of the state, and they show different things. And then Some of them might not work here at all, but they might work for somebody in a real specific context. So I have hesitated to finalize a list of indicators that are the best for defining health and soil.
Yeah, and that is relative too, isn't it? You know, I think it's important to, we do this in public health where we maybe don't focus so much on, when we're trying to improve an individual population health, maybe we don't focus so much on an arbitrary standard, but we look at progress. And so, the gains made, that if you have such a degraded plot of soil or such a degraded status of health for an individual or a population, health may be, health may be in the gains that are made to improve, some of the aspects, our indicators, and that needs to be celebrated and identified, and the gains that are made along the way, I think. So I think that it's important to keep in mind that health, the definition of health is relative, and we all start with different baselines, and we should celebrate those gains along the way. Any other comments, questions?
I think we can probably wrap up. Can we go ahead and thank Brenda again?
Thank you. I am so grateful for just the opportunity to have, dove into all this, and totally thank you all for the work that you're doing. It's really fantastic. And Nicole and Amy, you guys are the best. You just, everything there is to know about the department and the faculty, and you're really passionate about trying to get more funding and grant support in for everybody. And that's really inspiring. If it weren't for folks like you, then all of us scientists would just be sitting at home bored. So
thank you. All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.